Hello everyone and happy 2022. This is the Acid Communist, and today I am just starting off this video with a quick message to let you know that I will be attempting to read this book, The Third Unconscious by Franco Bifo Berardi, in a series of upcoming installments, today being the first. Also, I'm hoping that this year will prove to be the year I begin to sort of regularly upload to YouTube. So keep your eyes peeled for more content, and if there are texts that you would like me to read in the future, please drop a comment below and I'd be happy to consider it. But without further ado, let's jump into the start of this Berardi book. The Third Unconscious, The Psychosphere in the Viral Age by Franco Bifo Berardi. Preface. This book explores the ongoing mutation of the social unconscious. My point of observation is that which we inhabit at present, the historical threshold marked by the viral pandemic and by the catastrophic collapse of capitalism. From this threshold, we can see ahead of us a horizon of chaos, exhaustion, and tendential extinction. This mutation is perfectly summarized by the Japanese philosopher Seibu Kosho. In his book Radiation and Revolution, 2020, Kosho writes with hopeless clarity. Philosophically, this is an ontological shift from dialectics to immanence, from totalization by capitalism and by the state to the omnipresence of singular events. In this shift lies the prospect of the planetary revolution to be grasped in the decomposition of the world and the rediscovery of the earth. The concepts that emerge in Seibu Kosho's understanding of the Fukushima 2011 apocalypses are key for interpreting the global apocalypses of 2020, the ubiquitous, unstoppable proliferation of the principle of dissolution, radiation, viruses, the erosion of all symbolic and political orders, and the comeback to the long-denied Earth. Terra, defined by Deleuze and Guattari as the great deterritorialized, is reasserting itself and sweeping away the pathetic power of politics with the force of tsunamis, wildfires, and viral epidemics. I think that philosophy and psychoanalysis, far from panicking, far from railing against chaos, should assume the horizon of chaos and of exhaustion as a starting point for their reflection. Everything needs to be redefined, particularly what takes place in the intimate space of desire, emotion, fear. The unconscious is a realm without history, with no sequentiality, no before and after. It would be impossible to write a history of the unconscious, but it is possible to describe a history of the psychosphere of a society, and in this sense, it is possible to speak of a third unconscious, the third form taken by the unconscious within the late modern mental environment. The first phase was explored by Freud, who conceived the unconscious as the dark side of the well-ordered framework of rational progress. Science, education, industriousness were the pillars of modern public life. Marriage, monogamy, and nuclear family were the pillars of modern private life. In Civilization and Its Discontents, 1930, Freud asserted that social normality demands a high degree of denial of desire or repression of trieb, sexual drive and instinctuality. The bourgeoisie form of normality, dominant in the early 20th century, produced a particular form of suffering that Freud called neurosis. To run the daily business of life, the modern individual was obliged to renounce, to repress, and possibly to forget their own sexual drives. And this removal was pathogenic. Neurosis was the general form of this pathology. The framework changed in the last decades of the 20th century, when the acceleration of the infosphere and the intensification of the nervous stimulation, internet communication, and cultural globalization jeopardized the systemic repression of desire and the psychopathological regime of neurosis. The first intuition of this transformation of the psychocultural landscape can be found in Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, the book that marked the shift from structuralism to creative rhizomatic thought, but also the book that conceptually opened a Pandora's box of desire, thus anticipating the neoliberal hypermobilization of desire's energy as disjointed from pleasure. In Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari reject the idea that the unconscious is a sort of depository of the experiences that we don't want to see, or to remember, or to bring into our conscious life. The unconscious is not a theater, but a laboratory. The unconscious is the magmatic force that ceaselessly brings about new possibilities of imagination and experience. Today, 50 years after the publication of Anti-Oedipus, we can read the creative thought of Deleuze and Guattari as the ambiguous, and extremely rich cast for a double-edged future, the utopian future of the liberation of desire, and the dystopian future of neoliberal capitalism, where desire is celebrated as the impulse of consumption, competition, and economic growth, while pleasure is constantly postponed. The entire media system has been mobilized to expand on the promises of enjoyment, but this acceleration of the information flow has overloaded the capacity of human attention, thus ever postponing the possibility of pleasure, which has ultimately become unattainable. This social regime has led to the configuration of a new psychopathological regime, which has characterized the past few decades, the age of panic, depression, and ultimately psychosis. Panic means perception of the excess of possibility, intuition of an inaccessible amount of pleasure. A person panics because they are in view of an excess of pleasure that they cannot actually experience. Panic is a line of escape from depression, and depression is the reassuring comeback from a panicking trip. This is the inner oscillation of the post-neurotic psychosphere. In the age of the second unconscious, neurosis is no longer the general mode of psychic suffering. As the explosion of the unconscious leads to a condition of nervous hyperstimulation and psychological frustration, psychosis takes the place of neurosis. The rhizomatic whirlwind of the networked experience drags the unconscious, which Freud defines as inner Ausland, the intimate foreign land, out of itself, externalizing it to the point of a psychotic explosion. I call Semio Capitalism this linkage of accumulation, semiotic production, and nervous stimulation. Guattari suggests that schizophrenia has to be considered as a condition of the free production of meaning. In his thought, the schizoid becomes the crucial figure of an adventure of liberation, creativity, and knowledge. But this is only the liberating side of the acceleration. There's another side to it, which was announced by Jean Baudrillard in Symbolic Exchange and Death, 1976. The breathtaking acceleration of nervous stimulation, seduction, simulation, hyperreality goes hand in hand with neoliberal globalization, provoking a disturbance in the sphere of experience. The psychopathology of semio-capitalism is marked by anxiety, attention disorders, and panic. Depression comes as the final symptom of the semio-capitalist regime. The intensity of the social and emotional rhythms becomes unbearable, and the only way to escape suffering is to sever the link with desire, and consequently, also the desiring link with reality. Today, in the third decade of the new century, the phase of the second unconscious appears to be coming to a close. We are entering, it seems, a new psychosphere, where a third unconscious is beginning to take shape. Beware, the shape of this new realm of the unconscious is not easily definable, nor is it predictable, because the evolution of the psychosphere is not linear. There is no determinism in the psychosphere. There is no map, the inner Ausland, because, as Freud asserts, the unconscious has no consistency and no logic. So we cannot exactly know what directions this mental scape will evolve in, what kind of evolutions the COVID-19 pandemic will cause as it converges with a widespread economic and social collapse. When I speak of the third age of the unconscious, I refer to an open future that will be shaped by our consciousness, by our political action, by our poetic imagination, and by the therapeutic activity that we'll be able to develop during this transition. Despite these necessary caveats, it is already possible to outline at least some of the conditions of the current psycho shift. The threshold is here. It is now. It emerged with the arrival of the coronavirus in the space of our collective awareness. This bioinfo-psycho-virus is changing irreversibly our social proxemics, our affective expectations, our unconscious. Although the lines of this ongoing mutation are still blurred, some of its general traits are already clear and within our range of vision. First, the proximity of bodies has become a problematic factor, and its survival as part of our social life is increasingly endangered. Second, the spread of suffering in the pandemic age, not only medical suffering but also economic suffering, social suffering, and ultimately mental suffering, is already growing so intolerable that a form of immunization against emotion may become dominant. Autism and alexithymia might enter the fray of the psychosphere as the internalization of the refusal to feel the emotions of others, and possibly also one's own emotions. What I describe in this book is not a well-outlined path of mutation, but a magmatic field of possibility in a landscape of anxiety. In the first part of this book, On the Threshold, I will describe the effects of the eruption of the coronavirus into the space of collective sensibility and collective imagination. In the second part, The Imminent Psychosphere, I will try to ponder the different trends that are inscribed within the ongoing psychological mutation as it affects the spheres of sexuality, social proxemics, and desire.